We're going to begin this hour with a look back at a stunning moment in history involving a very high-profile allegation of sexual misconduct. Now, today marks 30 years since law professor Anita Hill went before a Senate committee to accuse Judge Clarence Thomas, then a Supreme Court nominee, of sexual harassment. A new podcast called, I like this name, Because of Anita, re-examines her story and what it means for history and the Me Too movement. The podcast features the very first public conversation between Anita Hill is her name, and Christine Blasey Ford, who accused Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault back in 2018. Here's a look at Hill's landmark testimony in the recent conversation with Christine Blasey Ford.
I thought he respected my work and that he trusted my judgment.
Anita Hill had only a few days to write her speech, but the impact of her words have been felt for decades.
Professor, do you swear to tell the whole truth?
Hill was a 35-year-old law professor from Oklahoma. She worked for Thomas at the Department of Education and the EEOC.
Judge Thomas began to use work situations to discuss sex.
She said Thomas sexually harassed her multiple times. Thomas denied all allegations.
It is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks.
I am here today not because I want to be.
26 years later, Christine Blasey Ford, a psychology professor, accused Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault while in high school.
I was pushed onto the bed, and Brett got on top of me.
He, too, denied the allegations.
I've never sexually assaulted anyone.
Both Thomas and Kavanaugh were confirmed to the Supreme Court.
We believe Anita Hill. We believe Christine Ford.
Hill and Blasey Ford talked about their experiences for the very first time publicly in a new podcast called Because of Anita.
These consequences of standing up are real. Would I do it again? Yes.
Certainly people in my community have seen how upended my life is and what we had to go through as a family. And all the smear media and the destroying of reputation and attempt at destroying career. And I'm absolutely sure that I would do it again. And that's not to say that it hasn't been really, really, really hard and that I'm still not as okay as that I would like to be 3 years out of the situation. I certainly wish I was doing better than I am.
Hill shared her advice with Blasey Ford.
I just want to say, to Christine, it does get better.
Thank you.
It will continue to get better.
I bet she really needed to hear that, too. We'll get better. Joining us now, the podcast co-hosts, that's Salamishah Tillet and Cindi Leive. Welcome to you both. It was so interesting, guys, to hear their two voices together. And I can imagine what it meant to both of them to be able to talk. How did this come about, Cindi?
I've known Professor Hill for years, and recently, over the last couple of years, got to meet Dr. Ford. And I knew that there was a mutual admiration between the two of them. And, they are sort of this club of two, not a club that either one of them ever necessarily would have wanted to belong to, but they're the two people who really understand what one another has gone through in a way that the rest of us kind of can't imagine.
Yeah, you point out that both of them are very private people who didn't want this attention, and now it's turned out to be one of the most, both of them, two of the biggest testimonies, public testimonies, that have been life-changing. I'm curious about what stood out to you, because Christine said, I just wanted to be a good human being. Anita said, I just want to be as clear as possible. It's not my job to persuade. They both wanted to, they say, just do the right thing.
Yeah, it's one of the things that both Salamishah and I noticed when we were talking to them is this sense of sort of civic duty and patriotism. They came forward simply because they had information and, in both of their cases, quite reluctantly. I think people forget 30 years to the day after Anita Hill's testimony that, she very much didn't want to testify, but was asked by the Senate Judiciary Committee to do so. And the way they both approached it was simply to look at it as their job was to deliver information, and they both, I think, for their own sanity, had to let go of what the outcome was going to be.
Because it's been 30 years, we've all been listening to Anita Hill's testimony. Salamishah, I cringe. I remember watching it very vividly. And the question she was asked, are you a martyr? Are you a scorned woman? Speak again about the pubic hair on the Coke can that she had already said 2 times. I mean, I look at that and I go, how was that even allowed to happen the way it did?
Yeah.
What are you thinking today? What does it mean to us today?
Today, well, I was 16 years old when I was watching the testimony, so I didn't even understand quite what was happening, either in terms of sexual harassment, nor the language that she was alleging Clarence Thomas used in the workplace. But today, I think one of the things that's striking is the differences in the experiences that Professor Hill had versus Dr. Ford in the kind of etiquette in the hearings. Social media, of course, the attacks on Dr. Ford were differently shown compared to Professor Hill. But also, I think the legacy of Anita Hill for all of us is to have this language of sexual harassment, and also to understand that these aren't villains in someone else's stories. These are three-dimensional women. And one of the things that I think was so compelling about hearing them in conversation with each other is that their humanity, their believability, and their trustworthiness was clear as day. And so when you think about the attacks that have continuously still mounted against them, I think their voices together provided an alternative.
The legacy really is illusion shattering, as you put it. The language of sexual harassment was not commonplace in 1991. The first survey of sexual harassment was 1976.
Yeah.
Talk about the journey we've been on.
Well, and by the way, that was done in Red Book magazine. It wasn't done by the government. No one in the government was really trying to figure this out. And in fact, the statistics are still very poor. There isn't a lot of great data about it, but we know that it's very, very pervasive, and that probably about 1 in 3 women and close to that of men have experienced it in the workplace.
Do you think it is continued at a consistent level, or can we say that because of conversations that began with Anita Hill, it's declined? Either one of you take that.
Yeah, I mean, I think because of Anita Hill, we saw that there were shifts in legislation and workplace protections. But the problem is that 30 years, that was kind of in the immediate aftermath of her testimony. 30 years later, we haven't seen significant protections or new, in terms of harassment, in terms of how much people can sue for. Those things haven't changed. So there was an immediate bump, so to speak. Yeah. And 30 years later, we're still dealing with a lack of enthusiasm and a lack of critical will to deal with these issues.
I remember during the Anita Hill case, men were relatively silent.
Yeah.
Do you believe now in 2021 that we are using our voice more when women come out?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one thing that is important to note is that the racial dynamics of the case, too, and the ways in which there was a real divide amongst African-American men and women in response to Anita Hill's testimony. But at the time, and we talk about this in our second episode, a group of Black women took out an ad in the New York Times, African-American Women in Defense of Ourselves, also in defense of Anita Hill. Speed up to Christine Blasey Ford, a group of men, an interracial group of men, intergenerational group of men, took out a similar ad in the New York Times in support of Dr. Ford. So I would say that's lots of progress. And Anita Hill talks about that in that episode as something that, what a way to think about a Black woman's legacy, that these men have been so moved by her voice or Black women's voice, and now they're coalescing around these issues.
And on race and on gender, Anita also talks about how it's not the work of one generation to solve all these problems. It's going to be multi-generational.
Yeah, the conversation continues.
It does, yeah. The podcast is Because of Anita. Salamishah, Tillet, Cindi, Leive, thank you very much.
Thank you.